posted it to YouTube.
For the Boulder Linux user?
Yeah, so I
just posted it today. Oh, fantastic. So I will give you the details of that because it is actually So let's just see this works. Okay, the first screen is actually for Tom, because Tom and I were talking. How many of you use grep? Who uses grep? Okay, who uses RG? Right, okay, so this has nothing to do with the presentation, but we were talking. So I just searched through a big repo for everything beginning EC2 underscore, which is a big thing in Ansible land, and RG flew through it in less than half a second. Grep minus R, 35 seconds. You're wasting your life if you're using grep, if you use it in big repos. Rip grep. Get with the program. It is so fast. That's insane, the speed difference. Look at it, it's just crazy.
Well, and look at the command lines, the length of the two command lines.
Sorry?
The length of the two command lines. One you just said RG EC200 bar, right?
Yeah.
Another one you had to do all this other crap.
I think ZSH has aliased grep to do something. But yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, RG just does, it does, as you say, it does everything. It recurses, it supports egrep syntax. Anyway, we didn't really come here for that. I'm going to see whether I'm just going to got this
to talk about
forward. And now I've lost Chrome.
Nice.
Oops. Okay. Thank you. So I know some of you saw me the other day. But anyway, here I am again. Building more secure containers. So I was going to do, what I originally agreed to do was actually building and running containers. But then I suddenly realized running is actually quite a big topic in its own right, and so is building. So rather than just cram them both into one, do the build one, kind of do like a bit like a discussion, so people have ideas, suggest it. I mean, we've got plenty of slides here, and then we can come back and we can do a run one. I'd be happy to do a run one, or if somebody out here is an expert in running containers securely. And then I would actually suggest, so we'll have these going for months now. We could also do an orchestration one separately, which is probably going to be Kubernetes. Maybe Kubernetes, and on your laptop, maybe Compose. It's kind of useful on your laptop. But anyway, so building more secure component. And what I want to do is make a discussion, because I live in a particular world. You'll see where I live in a minute, with people who live and breathe Kubernetes and containers. We have teams which develop all sorts of tooling around that. So I probably live in a different world from you. Some of you probably might live in a world where you've got serious revenue, or your customers have serious revenue coming through their containers. So they may actually have very different ideas, because none of the containers I'm involved with directly generate revenue. I don't work in a PCI compliant environment, and I don't work in a HIPAA environment. And I've got a feeling that we're going to start working in a sort of FedRAMP environment in a bit. So if people have thoughts, shout them out, join in, okay? Share your wisdom. So I want to make a discussion about building more secure containers, come up with, some of the things that we do, and if you've got stuff that you do, or you don't like some of the stuff that we do. As I said, I do think these are obvious topics. I did think it would all fit into one, but if you put it in one, you'd just be flying over it, and you couldn't do it. The service. A little bit about me. So I actually work for Red Hat. I am a senior principal architect there in what probably best called a DevSecOps team. We deploy a massive amount to OpenStack clusters, which belong to us on bare metal clouds, IBM clouds, Equinox bare metal clouds, an awful lot on Amazon. At the end of the day, that's why I was looking for EC2 underscore, because that's all the Ansible modules for manipulating EC2 star, EC2 underscore. A bit to Azure, not so much. I've got a feeling that might grow. We will work with any cloud. I mean, if it's cheaper, we'll probably go with it. So we do a lot of hybrid cloud, and we have a ton of Kubernetes. So if you don't know, OpenShift is Red Hat's Kubernetes distribution. So we have a ton of those, and we actually use them to to orchestrate a lot of our deployments. Even though Ansible is our deployment engine of choice, it's orchestrated by Kubernetes operators in the background saying, I want one of these, I want 5 of these, I want 3 of those, etc. So we do a lot of Ansible, we do a lot of OpenShift, and we do a lot of containers. I was a security consultant a long time ago for Sun. I used to build firewalls back in the 90s, and I drifted in and out and in and out in that. Strange enough, I was Oracle's, somehow, I never joined that company, but I was Oracle's director of Open Cloud Security, which is a very misleading job title, by the way, but I didn't mind it. So this isn't a vendor presentation. I think I presented at a couple of events in this room over the years, and then when the events used to be downtown, didn't they? Yes, so I'm back down then, and I never really do vendor stuff, although I work for Red Hat. You know, I'm never in the business of selling. Obviously, I'm talking about Ansible. It is a technology which is predominantly driven. But today, I'm not trying to do a vendor one, but we have a ton of tools in this space, so I will be talking about them. But I'm not trying to sell you on anything, okay? It's just that's what I work with. I work with RAL, I work with Fedora, I work with Boulder, Scopio, and Podman. If you don't know those ones, we'll talk about it. And I'm going to use what we call UBI, but it's a metaphor. You may have a substitute for that, okay? I'm not really going to talk about OpenShift today, unless somebody has a question. Okay, just a quick, so who uses containers? Okay, a lot of you, but not everyone. Okay, so we're just going to have a quick 101 about containers, or you've probably all seen something like this. Unless you don't read anything about containers at all. People talk about VMware, they talk about VMs, you've got hardware, you've got a hypervisor, could be KVM, could be ESX, Hyper-V, there's the Type 2s, VirtualBox, Parallels, VMware Workstation, and then you have your VMs, guest OS, all your things and library, and then your app, another one, another one, another one. And then over in the world of containers, we have our hardware, we have our operating system. We're going to talk a little bit about the runtime, but it's mainly off topic for this session. Otherwise, we'd be here all night. And then the containers. So the containers really have the top 2 layers, and it is actually deliberate that they're a bit thinner, because you know, if you install a VM and you install Fedora or Windows or whatever, you're going to get a ton of binaries and libraries, which, as we'll see, we probably don't want in our container. If your container is a Python container, it doesn't want a whole load of other crap inside it. And if you don't live inside that container, you probably don't want Vim inside it either. I know there's probably a few people who don't want Vim anywhere, but we'll let that be. We'll let that one go. But there's something missing from this diagram. This is what the standard diagram, and if you did a search for VMs versus containers, you would come up with hundreds of diagrams. There's something missing, and it's important for our discussion. There's a difference, because each of these VMs, I'm assuming VM was very popular, so you've got your VMDK file, you instantiate it, but they actually live in a VMM, a virtual machine manager. Inside the hypervisor, it wraps each of these, and these things provide isolation. Okay? So that's one important thing to realize about your container security. Containers do not offer the same amount of isolation as a VM offers. Okay? It is one of the trade-offs. Okay, they're incredibly lightweight. They are just processes. It's important to realize what's in your container is just a process or a bunch of processes. It's not like they're hidden away and they've got 17% overhead or 2% overhead or 1% overhead. They're just Linux processes. So be aware that VMs do have this isolation, which has got has got security implications. Isolation's a good thing. Now, has anyone heard of Kata containers? Okay, so this is a very slight digression. If you want the benefits of containers and you want the benefits of VMMs, there's a project called Kata containers, and I decided I wasn't sure whether it was still alive. You know, I hadn't read about it for a few weeks, and I went on to the GitHub, and the last merge was less than an hour. Now, maybe I got lucky, but I think it looked pretty viable. So Kata containers is the idea of running containers with a little shell around them, a VMM. You might say, why is that important? Who's heard of Dirty Pipe? Okay, everyone's heard of Dirty Pipe. I think there's a great, I'll tell you, if you are in the business of containers, SNCC, they've got some great stuff. They've got some great articles. But this container of theirs, they run it read-only. So containers, it has no privilege, it doesn't have root privilege, it's running read-only, it has no access to etc password, and with Dirty Pipe, they can overwrite it. Okay? And if another container comes up, it will see that overwritten etc password. Or it could be appending a key into your root SSH authorized keys. It could even then amend the SSHD config to allow root to SSH on, or it could allow you to SSH on, and then maybe do passwordless sudo. So there's some really big issues out there. So people think that containers are very isolated, but Dirty Pipe has shown, and this tiny Docker file, will allow you to create an image which can override, unless you're on the very latest and greatest kernel. So there are some really big deal security issues, and they're coming out at quite a rate. It's actually been quite an exciting time for critical and high Linux issues. So be aware. Okay, now I want to make another digression. So everyone's heard of Docker. Has anyone not heard of Docker? Has anyone not heard of one of these three, Podman, Builder, and Scopio?
Me.
Okay, so it's actually kind of ironic because, what are we using containers for? Cloud-native applications, stateless applications maybe, or maybe they have, little microservices. So we're using Docker to make these microservices. But Docker is a monolith. And by the way, I'm not here to put Docker down, by the way. I went to see them in 2014. I think they have pushed this so far forward. I used to work for Sun. We did containers. Only a handful of people ever really used them. The Solaris containers were quite good. But Docker just changed the game. I mean, and everything like the Cloud Foundry and Kubernetes are all builds of what Docker created. But anyway, the Docker that you run on your Linux host or on your MacBook, it's a monolith. A new type Docker pull, Docker run, Docker build. It talks to an API, running its root, and it will do everything. It will run stuff. It will pull stuff. It will push stuff. It will build stuff. And which is not really the Linux way or the Unix way before Linux. You have the idea of, we saw grep there. We ls to grep sometimes, and we do this to grep to this to this, we make these pipelines. So Podman runs containers. So it replaces part of the Docker functionality. It actually runs what are called pods. A pod is the smallest unit of work in a Kubernetes cluster. It can be one or more container images, but that's its job. Typically, you're not running this route. You shouldn't be running this route. If you want to run this route, you can go sudo podman. And some people do that because after Docker just works because it runs as routes a lot of the time. Whereas with Podman, you're running on something like a Linux system with SE Linux and AppArmor or Seccomp, it might not work as you think it's going to work. So there's a little bit of a learning curve. So Podman runs stuff. Boulder builds stuff. It'll build from a Docker file, but it will also actually allow you to man. And then you can actually, effectively like Turu, and you can actually program, you can actually install something as if you were installing a Linux operating system and save that as an image. And Scope here is really cool. Scope here does the pushing and the pulling, but it does one big thing that Docker can't do either, and that is you can move images from registry to registry. Normally in Docker you would pull, push, pull, push. Scope here will say authenticate to 2 registries and shift, because you're working at home. Some of you work at home, and there's pretty big images out there. People seem to have. Well, we're going to get to big images in a minute. So I just wanted to introduce those tools. Be aware they're around. We're not going to talk about them too much. In fact, we're not hardly going to talk about them at all today. But if we were talking about securely running containers on a single node, then we definitely want to talk about Podman. And as you may know, that Docker has been depreciated as a runtime in Kubernetes. So it does have, it's not the ideal tool, even though they made it all possible. So the first thing, how many of you, so everyone's in DevOps now. We're all in this DevOps Meetup. We're all in DevOps, and this means different things to different people. And some of you, I think, are clients. Some of you work as end users. Some of you are clients. I used to train a lot. I used to be a trainer for Kubernetes, and I would get 20 people in the room. And we'd always ask this DevOps question. What does DevOps mean at company A, your company? And at some companies, it would mean that everybody who is in ops got 3 letters in front of their name. They got 3 letters and they became DevOps. But they were sysadmins, network admins, storage admins, etc. And then if you go to YouTube, look up Velocity 2009, you will see the big presentation which kicked off DevOps, although they never say DevOps. It's Flickr is tens of deploys a day. It's basically an ops guy and a developer, and they're presenting at this conference how they do tens of deploys a day, which was a big number back then. Still is actually. So quite often we find in DevOps teams people who are very much ops and people who are very much dev. So if you're a developer making containers, you're responsible for building containers. You need to understand Linux if you're going to build secure ones. And it doesn't mean you need to understand how to pipe the output of one command, pipe the output of rep to sort. Because we all do that on our Macs. Everyone who's got a Mac. No, you really need to start understanding, if you're going to be responsible for building secure containers and running secure containers, you really want to understand the Linux process model. Which is very like the Unix one, but it's different. You want to understand packaging. You want to understand kernel namespaces, at least understand how containers exist. And if I was to start a container now and go into it and ask the uptime, it would say 3 days, even though it had only been running for 30 seconds. You want to understand where's my VM? Let's say 30 seconds. You want to understand kind of namespaces. You want to at least understand what C groups are, the constraining resources, which is how they corral the containers. Get an idea, at least be able to tell somebody what SE Linux is and what Mac is, mandatory access control. I know you all who turns off SE Linux?
And I also turned it on.
I'm leaving.
Yeah,
and I've done it.
There's a coloring book that someone in Fedora put together for SE Linux. That's amazing. Just
You're right.
give that to people, the SE Linux coloring book.
We'll take a 5-minute break while you all go and enable SE Linux. And also AppArmor and SetComp. And if you don't know what those are, I'm just going to touch on those. But it's definitely for another day. So when you're running a container, and you're running it on a Linux operating, I know they've got it on Windows, but you're running it on Linux, so if you're over in the world of Ubuntu with your AppArmor or you're using SecComp, you can actually control at an extremely granular level what capabilities within the kernel that container has. So if you are, just say you're the NSA, or you are Morgan Stanley, and you have something which you have to expose it, so customers are going to hammer onto this API. It's out there. It is part of, it's part of your exposure, your attack surface. You can actually lock down at that very, very granular level what that container can do. Doesn't guarantee it. So people who are using AppArmor and SecComp are largely, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert on dirty pipe, it's pretty new, but they are largely immune, I believe. Okay, so the first thing I'll say, apart from that, so I'd say before you start building, it's good to have that. If you don't have it, and somebody said, I need a Node.js container tomorrow, then the thing is just grab your friend, or maybe they're not your friend. Grab someone who does, and then you can collaborate. You bring the Node.js knowledge, you know NPM and packages.json and all that stuff, and they can, guide you through some of the things. That's why you don't want to run as root. Okay. Provenance. I heard Aqua use this word. I think we've all heard this word, but I think it's a really good word in terms of containers and container images. And Aqua were one of the early players in container security. And I'm always freeloading dinner. I went to freeloading at one of their breakfasts, and I heard them say provenance. It must have been 2017. Your base image. You're building an image, your own container image. You're going to be using a base image or not. We'll come to that in a second. You really want to know where it's coming from. How many people actually have ever run Alpine other than in a container or BusyBox? And okay. But you want to know who made it. What's in it? Where's it coming from? I bet you if I did put something called Jimmy Really Fast Mongo, if I put it out there, wrote a couple of blog articles, people would put it down. They wouldn't even bother finding out whether it was any faster than Mongo. And you say, oh yeah, but Docker scans it, or Quay Red Hat scans it. But you could just take Mongo, you could just go, my C's rubbish. You could just go in and you could modify the login code. And if Jimmy logs in with the right password, he's in. Recompile it, your scanner's not going to find that. It's not going to, that's not what they're scanning for. But do you actually need a base image? Oh, hang on. You don't actually need a base image with certain languages. If you have, any Go developers? Okay, so you don't need an image. You can actually, from scratch, you can make a image which doesn't have a base image. It doesn't have, /var/proc, etc. Yeah. It is just a base image, and then basically you state your static Go binary. It doesn't have to be Go, but Go is the obvious poster child. It's really big in the world of Kubernetes. It's statically linked, so it takes everything in with it. You copy hello in, and then your hello will just be able to run because it doesn't need anything else in there. So that's great, a great approach. If you're a Go developer, and if you can afford to develop yourself in Go, but a lot of you are going to be using Node, and because that's the space you're in, or Python, or whatever, or yes, tragically, Perl, yes. Sorry, Chad. He's my Perl guru. Also, you should understand that whole supply chain which is out there. So I use this. I stole this from my full credit from Sisted, or I copied their picture, made it prettier or easier. But you do want to understand that supply chain. There's lots of places where things can creep into that image. You know, and we're seeing that. We saw it again this week. Some developer was angry with Russia, and they went off and they modified their packages. Except the entire world loved them. It wasn't like, I don't know, I can't remember whether it's Node, or I don't think it was Python. So, but let's just say it was Python. You do a pip install, you get it. And that's software supply chain. And by the way, that's a big reason why software supply chain is such a big topic at the moment. And S-bombs and Log4j and the whole sunburst solar winds thing. You know, people are suddenly becoming aware when we put things in production, whether it's in a container or in an application, we are pulling in so much stuff from underappreciated solar developers living in Nebraska. If you've seen the cartoon. And we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago. You know, Color and Fixer, the guy who wrote those libraries, the Node libraries, he just started and had enough, and then he modified them. They're not destructive, but they don't behave like they used to. Okay, so that's provenance. You really want that. So I want to do a digression. As I say, this is not to sell you on something. By the way, these are free. These are free. This is a metaphor for find someone you can trust. So if you need Jenkins, let's just say you want to run Jenkins containers. Maybe you're doing it in class, or maybe you just need Jenkins containers. Why don't you use the official Jenkins image? They've probably done a good job. It doesn't guarantee they've done a good job. But, you know, Docker Hub, for example, they mark the official images. So if there's a Sona Cube image, or a Nexus image, or a registry image, they mark it. That's a good, it doesn't guarantee, but it's better than using Jimmy's really fast Mongo, for sure. So what Red Hat do is they have UBIs, universal base images. They are free for you to use. You don't need a RAS subscription. Not only that, they're free for you to distribute. Now, if you were to go and get a RAS subscription, Red Hat Enterprise A subscription, and use that to put things which weren't available freely in it, and you couldn't redistribute it. But what they've done with UBI is, over the last year, they've massively opened up the number of RPMs or packages and libraries from Red Hat which you can use for free and redistribute. So you've got 3 bases. And if you're a Debian person, there's probably something in the Debian canonical Ubuntu world which is somewhat similar, so you could use that. I'm using this also partly as a metaphor. So they have a UBI minimal, universal base image minimal, really, really small. They have 7, 8, and 9. So 7 is the old version of RHEL, 8 is the current, we're on 8.5 at the moment, 9 is the future. So they have all those. Minimal, which is tiny. Maybe you're going to put your little Flask API there, but we're going to do your Flask API, that's something better for you. Then you've got UBI, which is much more like a very small Linux distribution. You've got Yum in there, or DNF. So, you know, you go, your container file can say DNF install HTTPD or SSHD or whatever, you know, things that aren't in it. So in your build process, you can just assume, you can just treat it like a VM in terms of the way you handle packages. And then UBI init, that's interesting. If you wanted to make your own Apache, UBI init has systemd. So you can actually have a Docker file which said something like DNF, run DNF install Apache, systemctl enable Apache, and then when the image was deployed, it would be having a running Apache. Some of you will say, well, why don't you need systemd for that? And that's true. But if you do need systemd, because you could just start Apache, but if you do need systemd-like features, then you've got the init one. Basically, it runs init. Assuming most of you have got some Linux and Unix. But also, they do these. So if you want Python 3a, if you live in a RHEL, Linux, Fedora, CentOS, Scientific, Oracle, Linux world, in other ways, that part of the Linux world that uses YARN and DNF as opposed to apt-get and the Debian-based distributions, they have images like that. They have Node.js. They even have Perl. Like Ruby. So you can actually you can use these as base images. What's nice for you is, let's just say there is another CD, another big exploit. As soon as Red Hat have patched it, they will rebuild their UBI, and then these images which are derived from the UBI family will be rebuilt. So it's no longer on you. So that's one of the advantages of having really good provenance and a big mainstream vendor behind it. And as I say, SUSE may do this, Canonical may do this, but there's an advantage, because otherwise, if you handcraft your own bit of BusyBox, compile your own Python, do some nice stuff with pip, you also copy some libraries in, you're on the hook for that. And then, let's just, I shouldn't use the Java example, then Log4j comes along, you'll be on the hook. So provenance, make good choices, choose a good base. You certainly don't have to choose these, I just wanted to use these both to promote them, but also as a metaphor for a good image. Okay, I love this quote, so I think it is my favourite quote, because somebody asked me what my favourite quote was the other day, and I used this. But it's really good, I think it's really good in our business in general. In programming, in modules, in Ansible, in containers, Alpine and BusyBox don't have bash. I don't see why I would put it in. Maybe one day you do exec into that container and you have a look around and you find it a bit annoying. But why would you really add it? And you certainly wouldn't add ZSH to a container that was going to run Apache. I mean, what would the value be? Oh, I go into it once every 3 years to debug something and I like my ZSH. I love my ZSH, but I don't need it in my containers. So you really want the bare minimum. So you're fine because you can develop and go. The rest of us, we just need to work out what we can leave out, not what we can add in. For sure, keep it as small and as lean as you can. And if it falls over when you have it in test, then you can add something. The reason why it falls over. So keep your images small, tight, focused. Understand your application dependencies. And often not what they seem. So I live in the world, so I'm not a big Python developer. I've written some Python. I live in the world of Python though because of Ansible, and an engineer the other day gave me a requirements.txt, which is the dependency file, the packings.json of Python. I pip installed it, I did a pip freeze, and my 6 had become 30 because they all pulled in their friends and their dependencies. But you really want to understand your application dependencies and minimize your attack surface. Keep it as small as possible. I mean, if you can't explain why something is there, then Trent said this the other day. He actually said, 1 month ago, roughly, said, don't automate what you don't understand. And that's very true. Don't automate what you don't understand. Don't build things. This doesn't stack overflow, I should put this in there. So minimize your attack surface. Master two-stage builds. Do people know what two-stage builds? Okay. So yeah, compiled language. So the typical way you write a Docker file is you say from this image, and then you have a bunch of run, well, not a bunch, you have as few run statements as possible. You do all the stuff you do to customize your image. Maybe you could create a user, maybe you have your user command and stuff, and then you kick it off. And there's a few ways you can kick it off. But imagine you're doing a Git clone. You do this a lot in Kubernetes. You have these pipelines or containers hammering, they Git clone, and then Maven goes to work. It's quite amazing what it does. I don't know why. I'm very glad I didn't do Java. But you've got these containers are huge. They're massive and they're full of tools. I mean, if you were an attacker and you came across, oh, it's got compiler, it's got GCC, or it's got Zavak, or it's got LLVM. So a two-stage build, what you do is your Docker file says from, and you have your development image. And so you do this a lot in Kubernetes, and it compiles it. And then maybe you get Java, okay? And then the second part of the Docker file takes that jar file and puts it in another container, which is as small as can be. And there's no Java or GCC or Maven. So you're working with a lighter container. It's much easier to throw around. It's less resource, and it's got a much smaller. And then you're hopefully you're not building in production. Hopefully, we haven't talked about that. You should be building not in production. And also interpreted, because I don't know whether you'll be able to read this. Is that readable?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Ansible, typically runs in binaries. And in Ansible Automation Platform 2, they're moving towards what are called execution environments, which are containers. So you've got a repo with playbooks. Basically, the repo gets mounted into a container, and the container runs it. And inside there you have whatever RPMs you want, because maybe Amazon CLI is used, because people in Ansible do call commands, even though we tell them they shouldn't. You're going to have Python dependencies, Boto, OpenStack SDK if you're working with OpenStack. So here what goes on is they have two images, runner and builder, and they start installing, and all this is Ansible stuff, pulling in these collections. Collections are things like, I know how to talk to Junipers, I know how to talk to Cisco's. You know, these are modules which will manipulate BGP on a Cisco router and configure it. Or they'll back up a Cisco router. So they're all getting pulled in. Lots of Python stuff is getting pulled in behind it. And then they assemble it all into what Ansible needs to run, and then they copy it into the runner image. This is actually a three-stage build. I pulled it up today because I've got an example. And then suddenly I realized it, you see there's multiple froms. From base image as Galaxy. Galaxy is an Ansible thing where they keep things. Base image as builder, and finally from base image. And then at the end you have the base image with just, basically, it's just taking a few directories out of the other ones. This is all we care about. The rest of that stuff, I don't care. So, it's not hard. I should have done you a favor and chosen an easier version of that, but it's not hard. You just do something in one, like compile, GCC, -o, and then you copy it into the second image, and the second image is much lighter. Okay, it's a good practice. Smaller attack surface, less tooling. Don't run as root. Don't run as root. So a very common pattern, or good pattern is, maybe you have, so, you know, when you're building an image up, you have a front line, you typically have run lines, where you're doing stuff. You're manipulating that base image, perhaps, and maybe you're adding some more packages. You could be like, run DNF install Apache, blah, 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 create this user, do this stuff with this file, generate it, and then later on you flip into that user, and then you run as that user, okay? And then my app will be running as 1001 or 1000. So don't run as the root user. There's very few reasons why you would want to. I know people are doing things like Docker and Docker, Podman in Docker, Natalie in Docker.
I do lots of Docker and Docker.
Sorry?
I do lots of Docker and
Okay.
Docker.
And do you run privileged?
No, actually. But it's very difficult to do that. You sideload using a kernel hack.
Okay.
Mod probe does not work as expected, and your container runtime, regardless of which one you choose, but normally it's Docker, needs mod probe to load its kernel modules into the Docker container that runs in Docker.
Okay.
It's
I think
no
you're
fun.
edge case, aren't you? You guys, like GitHub.
The nice thing about running as root is that if I run as myself, I've got to use a password. Oh, sorry.
But most of our stuff, imagine you're running an API in front of a database. I don't care what you've written it. You've written it in Python Flask. And it's basically a routing table. You call a URL, you do an operation, and it routes it to a database or some back-end service. It just doesn't need to run as root. It should run as unprivileged everything, and you should be using SE Linux, because then whoever it runs it has even less. SE Linux is mandatory access control. So as a general rule, but I mean, the first thing is, with anything, you understand the rules and then you understand when to break them. Containers should be immutable. And by the way, no one's been very disagreeable yet. Feel free to disagree. Containers should be immutable. I got a feeling quite a few of you probably haven't written a Docker file. So there's two ways to kick off. Like if you want to kick off Apache, you can just go command at the bottom, cmd /bin httpd, and it'll kick it off. But there's also the option to have an entry point. Where people copy in entry point scripts. You can do stuff. It's a script. It's bash or Alpine-ish. Or if you've installed ZSH, you could use ZSH. But do not do this. Do not go yum update all. Because now, when you build your container and I build my container, they're not the same. We download exactly the same Docker file and we build, and we have got something which is moving in time. Even worse, if you do pip install minus, pip install minus my upgrade. So today you get Ansible 2.9.27, and then Red Hat suddenly decides to launch 2.11, having bypassed 2.10, which is completely different. I mean, it's hugely different, and the next person gets that. So if you need to patch, you rebuild your container. You have that in the run command. So you go run yum, and then you rebuild your container, and you tag it. We'll come to tagging in a second. Don't make mutable containers, because then you never know what you've got. And I'm having an argument now with a bunch of people. I'm saying, it's not infrastructure, it's code. If you tell me you ran it with container foo : latest, because my latest is in your latest, because you ran it last week. Stop using latest. Use semantic versioning. We can argue whether you have a V. It's either going to be V1.0.1, or maybe it's just going to be 1.0.1. But you really don't want these containers and you don't actually understand what's inside. That's my opinion. So you need to update, rebuild, and you'll rebuild them. You can go out and tell everybody how to use GitHub Actions. I'm sure some of you have Jenkins, Travis, Tecton, Zool. I spoke to somebody in Zool today. Anyone ever use Zool? No, I got the impression from him he was dying out. Sorry, I meant my colleagues use it. Okay, and yes, so when we're going to do that, isolate dependencies. 12-factor app. It's really worth a read. It's 12factor.net. And the second point is isolate dependencies. Always isolate your dependencies. If you're going to use Python, checking requirements.txt, into the repo. When you update it, commit it. I don't really know Node. I've played Node once or twice, but the same with packages.json. Don't say in your requirements.txt Ansible, it's Ansible equals 2.9.27. And if you read up somewhere up to 2.12.3, then put 2.12.3 and check it in. And then you've got versioning, and then when it breaks really badly, I'm on a plane and I broke it. My colleague Wolfgang had to do it, it wasn't my fault. He just goes back one commit. And as we say in my country, Bob's your uncle, and everything just works again. No, I would say isolate your dependency. I really recommend reading 12-Factor app. It's not a big read. It's by the people who created Heroku, and Heroku really pioneered platform as a service, and they did amazing things with Ruby. And I mean, they were doing it a very long time ago, and they learned a lot. And you could say there's 14 factors or 15 factors, or there should only be 11 factors. But it's well worth reading, and then you can go and read beyond 12-Factor app. Okay, and then so isolate them. Do not do this. You've no idea what you're going to get. You could do this. You know exactly what you're going to get. You are going to get Ansible 2.9.27, even when 2.12.3. But I think a much better thing is, you copy the requirements.txt file and then you just pip it. Because then Python people don't have to deal with Docker files. They go into the requirements, they say, what's all this crap? That's the problem. They can be in their world, and their DevOps engineers, new business cards, can write the Docker file which pulls it in. Then you've got separation of concerns, and then I won't mess around with your package.json. Bring them. I'm slightly deaf, so I'm going to come over.
Oh, sure. I mean, you said this was a discussion as we get it around. So something that we do, and you mentioned it here with Artifactory, is we don't just pin our dependencies, but we also bend them in the Boulder cache. And something that we've seen in the past is, with Pentium and especially with PyPI, there is no cryptographic sign of the packages. So even if you do pin a version, you can still suffer a supply chain with that because the underlying code haven't changed. And so I'm just curious, are there considerations there for handling, making an actual copy? I mean, we go so far as to mirror Docker images and maintain a full cache to ensure that whatever our dependencies are can change our numbers.
Right. So I haven't got any, when I wrote that, I haven't got anything more solid. How do you know that what you're pulling in, like the Ansible 2.9.27, is good?
Well, or what you would expect. When you pulled it last week, it's the same version. You pull it this week, are you still getting the same code? So with Go packages, they are assigned, so you can pull them across the internet. And even in Python, you can't. And so for us to guarantee that we, first off, the build never fails, and second, that it's not compromised. After we reviewed it, we pin a version and then save the package into an S3 bucket or.
So we're not doing that yet, but I do know a colleague of mine who's a lead, he's a distinguished engineer, he's very much in the Kubernetes space, and he has been sharing more and more stuff about cryptographic designing, more and more externalities. I think it's mainly in the Kubernetes space, but I have to be honest, I haven't actually read whether it's going down to individual, say, Python packages or Node packages, and signing them so that you're guaranteed that no problems and they're guaranteed the same.
Well, we kind of short-circuit the problem in the sense that we don't have to change the tooling, we just make copies and then only refer those private copies to sort of prevent this. You can actually put signatures in a requirements file and have to verify them. It's just a lot of work to make that work properly. The NPM I know what to do. So we've kind of declared bankruptcy and just.
So we're a bit slack in my team, I have to admit about that. So we're kind of randomly
putting pin versions, but not actually validating that IT.9.27 is the same.
I'm just curious. I didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, I have the tuning here. And maybe the tuning's out there.
It's not. I mean, in my terms, it's not. You know,
Right.
I come out of computer security, and the issue really is just that culturally we've accepted, you know, based on some of these tools, and this is just the way it's going to be. And so even when you have, you know, I've used almost every technique thus far, and the issue really comes down to you still can't trust. Like there's still like gaps in the chain of trust on this stuff, and so we've just basically said that the only way to be able to maintain it, even if you are going to suffer perhaps like patch lapses, is to validate it and then vendor it, and essentially only pull from your private caches. The only way we've been able to solve the problem.
Right.
So, I don't know, I didn't mean to sidetrack it, I was just
No,
curious.
that's actually, I think, I mean, you shone a light on a really clear, you know, big hole for people particularly who are very, very concerned about that sort of thing.
Right, and I believe the issue you brought up with the developer who was upset with Russia or over the Russia-Ukraine situation. I think it was an NPM situation, if I recall. And that's the exact problem, is that even people, well, I think in here you can't actually anymore publish over a package is sort of their interim solution. But it's still a problem, Python for sure. So we're just extra paranoid.
Right. Are you in a business where you need to be particularly paranoid, or you just are paranoid bunch?
Well, so we're a small startup, and the three founders all come out of computer security. So even though we're not doing that anymore, we've just seen so much that it's what we recommend is for people to work around the problem that we have and make copies. Only because we just created so many compromises.
Okay. So if you were going to do this, bring all dependencies behind the firewall, there would be, this is the missing step for you, because you would want to actually validate that what you're bringing inside the firewall is good. And it's not just good enough to put it in, but you have to know what it is.
Well, it's not just where you bring it into it, and what you've done in the process of bringing it in. So, you know, if you've validated all of your dependencies, which can be done, you know, with like our Go code base, relatively easy. Python, somewhat more difficult. Node, it's almost impossible right now. Because, And I mean, we've got a repo with, I don't know, 5,000 dependencies in it right now. And so, you know, we use Artifactory just because the recommendation I make is find the one that's easiest to use and use that first. And then as you understand the situation a little better, you can sort of refine that and perhaps make it something that requires a little bit more, you know, hands-on. The JFrog's, you know, I'm not affiliated, but like JFrog's cloud offering is dead simple to get started with, and the free tier can largely handle what we're supposed to do. So that's where we're at, and we just have to take the time to review our dependencies.
I think the tuning's going to get better this year. You know, you've seen the presidential mandate come down.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to be in zero trust. Everyone's going to be moving. Every federal agency is going to move towards software supply chain, S-bombs. And I've been playing around with Cyclone DX, because Cyclone DX is still quite new to me. And I don't think it actually is more for identifying vulnerabilities than validity of the package. I will say one thing which will probably be particularly horrific. There's a particular product I work with where people version these bits of executables. They say, and it was actually in that Docker file, they say, give me 17.0.1. 17.0.1 is a Git tag, which is as mutable as you get. You can just clone it, delete the tag, merge in whatever you want, and retag. I mean, the Git tag is, very mutable. So, what I will say is, I think it's a really, really valid point. But if you are building stuff, bring it in. How you validate it and how you know
that how you transformed it. And look at some of these tools, like Artifactory or Nexus. You're a Nexus user, aren't you? Or the Artifactory?
I used to use Nexus in my old job. And yeah, Nexus, all of these tools, like depending on how you configure it, can be very insecure. Or it can be secure. But it's not on Play as a registry to verify that I am who I say I am, and that I
Well, Craig should authenticate you first.
Yeah, but the image that you pull from Play would be identical tag to tag for what you would pull from Docker.
Right. So that is one area. So I definitely haven't been doing anything in this signing, but there's definitely we now have cryptographically signed checksum layers. So each layer of the image can be signed. So those can be verified, but I don't know what the tool chain looks like to do that. It's just that there's only so much time in the day, and I see these ones going by, and I know if I introduce them into our world, they're in the backlog. Unfortunately, if you're the NSA, they're probably not in the backlog. In fact, if you're the NSA, you're probably modifying them, a bit like they did with Jupyter networks. Okay. Scan, and scan. And don't just scan when you build. Docker scan. Docker scan uses SNCC. That's how they pronounce it. I've never heard anyone actually say it apart from myself. Or you can use Write, or you can use, there's a whole bunch of tools. But scan your images. I scanned one the other day, an image we use a lot. It probably was a very, very good image once upon a time. It has over 2,000 vulnerabilities now. It has over 200 high-end criticals, and it is now a mighty 2.8 gig. You know what it is? It's a terminal. It's designed to be cast into an iframe. So if somebody wants to work through a lab or something, you can have 3 iframes. You can have the lab there, and then you can have 2 terminals. And so they're terminals with all the Kubernetes tooling. And it seems like they decided they install every single version of kubectl and OC, which is the OpenShift sort of equivalent in it. So it's staggering. Scan. But not just when you build it. Because there's going to be a new vulnerability tomorrow. So your image may not have mutated. So, and that's where the SBOMs are coming in now. Because if you've got Cyclone DX, you can have Cyclone DX in your CI/CD pipelines. So every day it can run against your SBOMs. So I had a friend, true story, and I said, hey, you must have been really hit by Log4j, because he works for a really big financial institution, really big, and I know that quite a few of you have a relationship with this institution, even if you never chose to. And I said, that must have really hit you, because they've always buying other companies, and they've got C, and they've got C++, and they've got Java, and they've got more Java, and they've got microservices. I said, so how did you guys deal with Log4j? He said, it was easy. I said, what do you mean it was easy? He said, we asked Artifactory. They said they knew every version of Log4j and whether it was inward or outward facing, and they just messaged every single team saying, you're outward facing, 2 days to fix. You team, you're inward facing, you've got 1 week to fix, the rest of you go back to work. But that is not what most companies are like. Most companies don't know where all their memcached is. They don't know where all their Log4j is. There were 35,000 packages on the main Maven repository impacted by Log4j. So scan, there's tons of scanners. Find, I tell you, Anchor's cool, Aqua, SNCC, there's a whole bunch of companies out there, Red Hat, and maybe start getting familiar with this. I think we're going to hear a lot more about Cyclone DX. SPDX is an SBOM standard, which is really more about how you're using MIT. Ooh, you've got GPL3 here. Are you sure you wanted to build it this way? It's kind of, I would say, this is very coarse. It's sort of more licensee centric, and Cyclone DX will say this is a critical, you know, this, and tools like, right, they update every day. I ran it before I came here just to see whether my laptop was all set up, and you know, it pulled in a new database. So what did I miss? I mean, you raised a really very valid point.
Well, with layers and just with images in general, I think when you're familiar with this, you know, you can pin to a particular version of the container.
So,
You can pin to a particular version of the container. You know, you can say, I want to pull this particular
Right, yeah.
right? But how do you know that you're getting the right layers? Like, you talk about that there is layer sign, but did the tooling, you sort of...
no, so the tooling to look at Docker inspect, Podman inspect, Scopio inspect. So actually, no, this is a bit of a contrived command because I'm actually going to get a Scopio image to inspect something in another. That's actually kind of cool because Docker is running one image to look at another image. But for example, so this one is not signed, but the inspection tools. So Scopio. I don't know what Docker does. I mean, I can run Docker inspect.
I guess what I'm wondering is, can you not just pin to a particular tag, but also to every layer that tag refers to, and then validate that?
Sorry?
Can you not? Is it possible to not just pin to a particular tag, but to also like store the shards of every single layer that's a part of that, and then know that when you do a pull in the future, you're always pulling it across, right? So right now we're using ECS and not Kubernetes, and I mean we potentially will get there, but we're just not regulated yet. So is that basically the solution? Use Kubernetes?
So what Kubernetes is, it creates another object. It creates, instead of, you know, because we talk about images,
Right.
Kubernetes also has the idea of an image stream, which is kind of like an image with metadata wrapped around it. So you deal with image streams, and then they can deal with text and signing, and that is so. On the other hand, so the image stream carries with it the container and the text.
For every layer?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. So I'm not a great expert on image streams, but that is the basic. That is why they don't use an image object. They use an image stream object, which is image plus metadata.
Oh, so I know what that command is. You know, I just hit that when I was coming over to you. That's that container, I'm sure of it. That one I was talking about with all the vulnerabilities. Yes. Yes.
Oh my goodness, it's a lot of
Yes.
text.
Don't do this. Don't build a content. Don't build these vast images. Anything else?
I have a question in case you happen to know the answer. I have had headaches in the past from SE Linux if I'm trying to run one flavor like Ubuntu containers on top of another flavor of Linux as the base operating system, because somehow the SE Linuxes don't collaborate with one another.
Okay. So I don't have much experience of that, to be honest, because I work for Red Hat, and then after the Sun acquisition, I worked for Oracle Linux, and Unfakeable Linux and RHEL are the same pretty much. So I mean, they're basically from the same sources.
The branding is different.
Real experience.
Yes, so
Cool.
what you want to do is, in whatever like rel, you look for DNF. There's a command called what provides, so DNF what provides. What you're going to look for is audit to allow. And that will give you the policy And on the GUI aspect of it, if you have a GUI installed, it'll also give you a
Next
breakdown
speaker.
of like what this policy means and what you're changing by allowing it. So it'll give you a why, what policy it violated, and either how to allow it or how to work around it.
Okay.
Yeah. So audit to allow is what you want.
All right.
And it's the number 2. So audit number 2.
Yeah, I've used that before, but it was a long time ago.
It's still
Yeah.
dirty when you're switching between distros with contexts. Because the context as you're setting from the host OS, the context it knows in the container, are like these disparate things.
Yeah. It's confusing.
You might get more mileage out of an entry script perhaps, where you can control it at startup.
Oops.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, this is very.
Thank you.
I also wanna give you kudos for the RG stuff, because I took this little toy RG, or RipGrep.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
took this little toy computer, I installed RipGrep, I apt-get installed it, and I tried it out, and it is fast as hell. It's so fast that it's almost half as fast as git-grep, which is, much
Yeah.
faster. But there's a lot of people who are afraid to install Git, right? And don't have it on their computers and would never use it. And so, and it also has the nice advantage that Git is this big, and if you're making little bitty containers or you're worried about provenance, you don't have to worry about looking around for the provenance of Git, right? Or the security holes in Git by just installing RipGrep instead. So even though it's slower,
Right.
right?
So once you have it, then it's so cool because what you will do is you will just search for everything. When I want a code snippet, I just go into the repo. So I want to see how Guillaume does his when, so I just RG when, and then I just go -A5, so I get the next 5 lines, and then I put these when. Oh, that's nice. That's a nice way to construct that boolean.
Yeah.
All right, I have a question. I hate to ask it. I don't know if I love it or hate it. The prompt you got in your shell, the prompt in your shell,
Oh, yeah.
where it overwrites you see the prompt with all the information, but you only see it for the last command you did.
Yeah, that's
Is that a Z shell thing?
that is
Or is that something?
Oh my ZSH with a P10K P10K prompt. I actually customized the scripts, but I didn't add that functionality. So if you go to the Oh my ZSH site, they will have links to P9 and P10 prompts, and I've done this in Python. There's just a few control. You can rewrite the command, the line over and over again very easily.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my ZSH. Is anyone still on Bash?
Me?
Yeah.
Choice.
There's Bash It though that provides very similar functionality.
Yeah.
That shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has anybody used NewVector for container scanning, container security?
I have not. No, I want to do it.
Alright. I think it's from the SUSE team. And it's an it was an open source project that they bought because it's native Kubernetes cluster container scanning, but they also do Docker container management or scanning. I don't know, it's a whole package of things. I'm just curious. Ran across it recently and just curious if anybody had used it. Sounds like cool. Good data.
SUSE is one of those things that you'll find in like incumbent industries. That'll be like, we only use SUSE, and then no one else uses SUSE. We're
Yeah.
like, what? Celeste what? What does that stand for?
But there are folks that do.
There are.
Yeah, right here.
Sorry.
There's still folks around.
Especially in terms.
Oh, it's a.
Yeah.
Maybe someday it'll.
That was better.
Thank you. Y'all hang out, drink some White Claws. Or if you don't like White Claws, we have Truly. You don't like that, like Sono. Come on, you know,
Talk about combining museums. Santa Claus food. Oh yeah, you look at it on the side. Try to keep it less weight on the back.
So I was just saying, out there, the legal it's a lot faster to do. Actually, outside of hospitals, but I didn't kind of, I just kind of
Okay, so I just then I just
Quarter. I just say that I only get proactively set working hours, and outside of that time, it's not slack, neurotically checking
I wanted to see you out of here. There's good. That's good to know. It grows.
I'm strange, even though I'm in the record on my laptop. I never some of my friends customize T-Bucks to their heart's You were like the other way, right?
No, I was.
I think it is
on the world.
That's how I drive. That's how I drive. Absolutely. So you can hear two digits. Yeah, no, I agree. And then it soars. Yeah. When it is stored, it is stored, it's just a very big entity. Something like that. You need to start with time. Thank you very much. Take a look at the people who have access to property images. I mean, typically it's the refugees, many free houses, and features, right. Now I'm just thinking, because I have no rights of images.
This is what I think it's a bedroom, he has the
Almost like a as opposed to
and if we could do that kind of seamlessly,
Oh, yeah, the little, yeah.
it was.
Yeah, where your kids move that, yeah.
And then
there was a year.
and I know there's loads of people
Okay, so the ratio is
yeah, so you have to, this is, so the other topic,
and so
so I don't normally do a lot of these, it just happens to be coincidence, but this on software supply chain. Well, I mean, they literally had. So there's been an attack since here. And you know, this tag. I mean, it's the other day. Colouring bacon. What he did was he inserted his lead. And he was the guy in the route. He just
I'm in Lafayette 4 days a week.
but the happy was the most serious one. Sorry?
Not there.
No. Right. But there was a guy this week who was trying to attack Russia. He's sort of a shotgun approach to it. And then
that's why they said, like they recently said, please stay out. Like, you're getting in the way and you're going to cause more problems than you're going to solve. Which is true, right? Like, as much fun as it would be.
They hacked into Juniper. They hacked into their source code for their firewalls that they modified way back in their history. And every time Juniper released their firewall, then it was back to
Right. So, y'all have to read that book I was telling you.
Which about?
It's called the Cult of the Dead Cow.
So I read the name.
Yeah, so the Cult of the Dead Cow was an early activist group, and they, along with a couple of folks that really turned out to be the early cybersecurity researchers, started this process of responsible disclosure with like the early Microsoft products that like as they were being adopted in Microsoft and folks didn't care that they authenticated users in a secure way. For example, these were the guys that released the tools to show how easy it was to break this protection and get Microsoft to pay attention. It went to the point at what they got Microsoft's attention to one of their leadership and sat down to show the flaw to a Microsoft executive, and the Microsoft executive invited them into the office, and they were like, here's the CD that has this flaw on it, I'll walk you through it, and the exec website, just grabs the CD and throws it in there. And the hacker was like, wait, what are you doing? You don't know this. Why are you putting the system's not connected to the network, right? He's like, no, it is. It's like, well, you're going to scan it and make sure that this is, not some malicious software I'm having you install. He's like, you need to have an antivirus software installed on this system. Anyway, the foundation of the computing, like commercial computing network, was built on insecure practices. Like the software, they didn't give too credit. That's right. And they didn't have any code signing for applications that could be installed by Windows 95. Right? Until 95, there was no application signing. It's a good book. You should go. I will check it out. Yeah.
The death of
The Cult of the Dead Cat.
What I've been reading is I read Sandstorm.
Amazing. Sandworm?
Sandworm.
Yes, Sandworm.
I read that recently.
That was really good.
And yeah, absolutely. It was so perfect because I read it. I actually missed out slide. I gave it your due. This one.
I want to see your hoodie because I feel like it must be rad.
I love this one because I've stolen it and then I've made this book and I've overwritten this. I've got the artwork for it and then I pretend this is a sidecar. I have one which, in fact, it's in the oh yeah.
And it's the highest score.
Modifying the higher score. Have you seen
Great talk.
You're welcome. I would do a run one, but I think you should. But if you do need someone, we could do a run 1, 2, 3, 4 months next time you haven't got a speaker.
That would be awesome.
Because we can do the same thing, except now we got our image. How can we run it really safely? On Node, maybe with Compose, which my friends don't know, on Kubernetes.
That would be awesome.
I don't know if you've got cloud. I don't know. Sorry?
How are you running botnet while you're selling your developers already?
You
have to mount them into the pod that runs the pods? That's terrible.
So it's not coming until 4. So the podman team are working because I said we can't. You realise we can't use Answer now because Answer does the relies on these volume mounts. Yeah, it's just not there. So the only way to run it is to run it inside a VM. And not the VM you get with Podman machine, is to actually impart. You notice I am Fedora. So yeah, there isn't. Okay. So I actually
Now I feel like
on my Mac.
yeah, I tried to get everybody off, and then it was just like, no subscription to Docker, and another one, and another one.
I would use them over the head because volumes are different. I think some people say I want volumes of that, and they used to say that about components. They used to say components, but I expect everybody uses components, and then they added components because you've got to do with the customer as well. Volumes are like it's too shitty. It sounds on the face of it. All I'm doing is I'm sharing to my VM. And then my VM is sharing to its container, which should be supported by that Linux in the VM. So that should be there for free because it's already writing for it already. So it does sound like in the face of it, all you should be doing is say, if you go -v, you just kind of export that directory into the VM.
On all of my Linux machines at home, it works. Except for SE Linux relabel, it requires me to restart the pod every time I have files that I'd like to show up.
Yeah, it bugs me.
But on Linux, it's like, I don't
Have you tried the other one? The UTM one, what's it called? There's this company that does VMs for the M1.
That's true, and truth is no firmly defined meaning.
And they use Node CTR, and I believe it all runs.
Arguably the form versus PHP.
It's just so far away from supporting that. Don't want to go down that.
Yeah.
But it is coming. They know they need it. And Windows needs it. Because most developers are not on it.
That's because
Probably.
ships should install.
I have Fedora running on my Mac, my MacBook Pro.
Under M1?
No, you know that shit this week.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, but the list of things not working is very impressive. But if you do a search for M1 Linux, they ship the very first. Not Fedora, it's called Ashley or something. Maybe like a Japanese
Yeah, we
one.
just started. Cool.
Ashley Linux. Yeah, that's coming.
So,
Well, Jeff had something.
but a tool for
Just wanted to say superb talk.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Sorry I couldn't help your friend about it. Stuff.
No,
just-
I really appreciate your answer.
No, more about it. I'll see you in the next one. You'll be at the Linux.
Yeah, as long as they have it real, and not a face mask wall.
Well, you know, there is.